All right, Matt. Listen, we're doing more YouTube. We're doing more live stuff. We're live over on Periscope as well as on YouTube. Like I said, not live on Facebook today. We're just trying things a little bit differently. But this is another iteration of This Week in MMA, the first episode from 2020. As always, one half of your co-hosting duo at Craig Allen. You can find me at Craig Allen FMP. My actual name is not at Craig Allen. Matt, you can find him on Twitter at Matt Allen FMP. We want to thank everybody for joining us, whether you're over on Periscope or YouTube. Like I said, the whole point of doing these shows this way is so we can head into the chat and get your perspective on the world of MMA. And it's a little bit of a lighter week. We were kind of thinking up some different topics to go over. Of course, last night, like you can see next to us, you had the PFL Championship, the culmination of the second season. You had 6 titles on the line, $6 million on the line. So some interesting stuff going on there over with the PFL. You also had RIZIN 20. We talked about it earlier on in the week. We're going to recap it a little bit today. But Matt, I mean, how are things today? How was your January 1st of 2020?
Oh, I had a bit of a headache in the morning, but I'm doing pretty good now, Craig. Yourself?
Well, that's good to hear. I'm well.
That's
I'm well. I had a couple of pops. I enjoyed PFL. Headed over to Twitter as always, and really enjoyed the fights. And for me, they delivered. The question that I have, we're going to set today's episode up in a couple of different parts. So first, like I said, we're going to talk about PFL. We're going to talk about RIZIN 20. If you want to, share your thoughts on the recap, maybe on what you saw from RIZIN. We talked about Bellator earlier on in the week. Head into the chat, like I said. But PFL, we're going to do it this way. Then we're going to get into the Twitter purge, which is, of course, our favorite our favorite segment of the show, and I've got a lot of interesting tweets coming up later on. But the important thing here, PFL Championships, your second season. We were on NBC in the first season. Of course, this is kind of it's a newer organization. It's a continuation of World Series of Fighting. You have a lot of talent from there. What do you see coming up from PFL next year? I know we're gonna talk about a couple of the things.
So some positives with Rory McDonald being introduced to the PFL. I feel like casual audiences still do know who Rory McDonald is. They still do remember him from his UFC time, even though Bellator he did had quite the mixed results there. So a lot of excitement going into the next season. But honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of the PFL. I can admit that up front. I think that I like the idea. It's just the fact that they have these really good champions who are pretty dominant, and they don't really have the level of competition necessary to really challenge them. So you're just going to keep on having these repeat winners over and over and over again until you can kind of build up a better roster around them.
It's interesting. This is one of the thoughts that I had, and I'd like to get people's opinion on this. So you've got Lance Palmer, one in 2018, one in 2019, hasn't lost a fight in forever. Natan Schulte did the same thing. What do they do well? I mean, Natan Schulte can certainly finish fights. Lance Palmer can, but he's very wrestle-heavy. He's wrestle-heavy where you see it from guys with that type of pedigree, the All-American, went to college, they chain wrestle a bit. The thing that he does nicely is he's the type of guy, it's a little bit more exciting. I'll put it on the Jake Shields bar. So let's have Jake Shields as our litmus test. Darian Caldwell is below that because Darian Caldwell takes people down, holds them there, and doesn't really do a whole lot of striking. He just kind of holds position and stays on top and wins on points, but does he really?
But that's the thing. We're not arguing that wrestlers aren't fun. There's so many really good grapplers in MMA. You have guys like Aljamain Sterling, Damian Maia, Khabib, guys who when they take the fight to the ground, every second they're there, they're looking to finish the fight. And then there's other guys like Lance Palmer, like Darian Caldwell, like Jake Shields.
I'll throw another name at you because they kept talking about San Diego State. That's where David Michaud wrestled. Yeah. David Michaud, obviously a way more exciting, well-rounded fighter, but I thought, San Diego State, you've got a guy like Logan Storley. If you're on the Jake Shields bar, Logan Storley's probably below that. But, of course, like you mentioned, there's a lot of wrestlers that are above that. They switch styles. They're very exciting on the feet. They have a lot of different things to throw at you. Lance Palmer, Natan Schulte, very dominant. The one thing that I have an issue with, and, again, we'll talk about this a little bit more, with their type of offense, they can grind and grind and grind. And Lance Palmer is a really, really good fighter. And he trains with some of the best of the best. They talked about it. I mean, he's working in New Jersey. He's with Frankie Edgar, Mark Henry, a great camp. And Edgar is a perfect guy to train with, especially if you have that type of skill set. And Frankie Edgar said before the fight, they did a little bit of a video montage. He said, this is one of the strongest guys I've ever wrestled against. So it's kind of neat to hear that from former UFC champ. And I'm sure that's what PFL was trying to do. But still, this format is set up in such a way that you can win that way. And I think you said it's great that they signed Rory McDonald. Is it? Because
I think it is.
He can just point and win fights, and then he's your champ.
He's going to point on the feet, and there's always the risk of him getting hit. Like, Rory McDonald's fights always have that chance of just devolving into kind of a wild slugfest. Like, I know the last Lima fight wasn't all that exciting just because Lima was quite a bit better than him in every area, but there's always the chance for Lima 1, Rory McDonald. There's always a chance for Lawler McDonald. Like, he still has some of that in him, I think. I know we've sort of been questioning that ever since the John Fitch fight, but there is that chance. And again, there's a lot of casual audience who recognize Rory McDonald to this day, and I feel like that'll bring a lot more eyes to PFL. But honestly, I feel like the reason the PFL wants Rory McDonald is so he loses there, and they can kind of try to discredit everything that we're saying right now is, oh no, our champions are the best. They have been fighting top level competition, but that's the problem. Let's say that there's, I don't know, even a Robbie Lawler at this stage of his career, if he goes into the PFL welterweight tournament, he wins easily. Like, all you have to do is defend the takedown and strike. And here's my thing. The argument is, well, hey, just be good enough to defend the takedown. The issue is that the PFL doesn't have a good enough roster developed yet, full of guys who are able to do that. Like, Santiago Ponzinibbio was ranked, 10th? I actually think they took him out of the rankings. He would run through the welterweight tournament. It wouldn't even be competition for him. Jeff Neal, like, there's guys who are in that mid-level UFC or Bellator range. Like, if Douglas Lima entered that, he would lop everyone's legs off and uppercut everyone. It wouldn't even be fun to watch.
And one of the things that I wanted to bring up, and it was a conversation that we had on Between the Links, which you can find on Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network this week, we did a bit of a recap of the year. And one of the last things that host Mike Heck brought up was, what if PFL and the UFC decided to use the connections that they had? Because now, of course, PFL, you're over on ESPN, UFC's on ESPN. Of course, this was on ESPN Plus, or ESPN2 rather. In the States, they're all on TSN in Canada. But the point being, what if you had somebody, the UFC's roster, it's so big. You have 500, 600, 700 fighters on the roster. And let's say you add 20 or 30 every year through Contender Series, and yes, you're going to lose some fighters, what have you. But what if you had some developmental deals struck up between fighters that you signed from Contender Series or otherwise, and have them compete on the PFL?
Because that's just saying PFL's the B League. That's diminishing your own product at a certain point, because if you're putting all your developmental guys in their tournaments and on that card, it's just going to say that, hey, PFL's good, but it's a developmental league for the UFC, and I feel like they're trying to be a Bellator, be a KSW, be one of those large organizations.
The one thing that I want to say, and to counter to that, is every now and again we'll see fighters competing on a 1-fight, 2-fight type of schedule with the PFL. They're not really in the whole season. They're not competing for a shot. Brendan Loughnane, you saw him as like a prelim. He was the only prelim. He won his fight. That was the first fight of the night. It wasn't televised on TSN or ESPN. He gets a win there. Umar Nurmagomedov, that's another one of those guys. Habib's cousin. Of course, there are a lot of cousins of Habib and others.
Last name.
Yeah, in this season. But yeah, we'll go through it a little bit if we have a look. So your first fight, Loughnane, David Valente wins by decision. Your next one, you've got Emiliano Sordi taking on Jordan Johnson. And Matt, we talked about this off air.
You were big on Jordan Johnson?
I was big. He was undefeated at the time. I had a conversation with him kind of behind the scenes, and we were going to bring him on for an interview with Fight Night Picks, and he said, yeah, I'm in some contractual negotiations. Let's just wait till that happens. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I mean, he's undefeated, so he's probably going to re-sign with the UFC. Nope. No, went with PFL. And so he ends up with PFL. He ended this year, on a low, especially in the finals, taking on Emiliano Sordi. Sordi looked great in the fight, gets a finish, first Argentinian or major Argentinian champ in an MMA organization. So great win for Sordi. I know a lot of his teammates were congratulating him in the States last night. For Jordan Johnson, that's a tough one, and that's a risky run going over to PFL. And, being such a dominant wrestler like Jordan Johnson, he loses to Sordi. So a great win there. This is where I wanted to go with the whole thing. Your next fight was Lance Palmer, Alex Gilpin, and Lance Palmer won this fight handily. His dad is like a muscled-up Burt Kreischer that wears a T-shirt that says Ultimate Farting Championship. He's a scary, scary man, and I would never want to fight him. Point being, Lance Palmer has that style where you can get yourself all the way here, plus the way that the PFL season works. This was the third time in 2019 that he fought Alex Gilpin. And I know there were some extenuating circumstances around that. I'd like to get somebody's take on this out there that's following along live with the show, but it's tough. you're bringing together a year-end championship style thing, and then you have a lot of wrestle heavy guys, and a lot of people complained. A lot of people complained about this online and said PFL's worse than Bellator. PFL sucks. PFL's terrible. It was an enjoyable night of fights, but there were some slow ones here.
The PFL is kind of like the Philadelphia 76ers. They have all these good pieces, they just don't fit together at all. And that's the best way to describe kind of the organization as a whole. I like the idea that they're trying to be, okay, the casual person can follow this because you're going to kind of know the matchups going forward. If you win, and you win, point-based, of course, but then you can kind of figure out, okay, this guy's fighting this guy in the end. But it's just going to keep on being the same four people over and over and over again. And yes, Rory McDonald's going to add a little bit of excitement, but they start needing to get like real marquee guys. Like there was a period where Bellator got like Benson Henderson, they got Lorenz Larkin, Ryan Bader, Rory McDonald, Gayer Mousasi, all within like a year and a half. And that was like, oh damn, Bellator's like really making a big play. And PFL, we just haven't seen that from yet. And I know that they kind of have to develop themselves first before they get to that stage, because Bellator at the time, when they got all those big free agent signings, they were much more developed than what the PFL is now. But I feel like they're going to have one of those big like 6-month period where it's just like, oh damn, he's in the PFL, she's in the PFL, and they really got to build that roster.
And that's where it gets interesting. We'll take just a second and we'll answer one of the comments over on YouTube from Oliver Sell, who says, any word on Henry Cejudo's return, potential opponent? Do you think Ali will stop that from happening, since he also manages Moraes as well? It's interesting because he vacated the flyweight belt. Oh, you didn't vacate it. I don't know, but he did. And he's going to fight at 135 pounds. It was said after his fight against Moraes that he had shoulder surgery. That was June, so he's going to be out until this year. Now we're into this year, so it's a very relevant question. Who's he going to take on? It's a conversation we've been having for a couple of weeks now. I know on Loudmouth as well as here. The thing for me, it's got to be either Aljamain Sterling or Piotr Jan. And
really, those
pick from there. A lot of people are going to say Jose Aldo, but for me, it's got to be between one of those two, and there's no real wrong answer there.
I think Aljo is a much worse stylistic matchup for Cejudo.
Yep.
But I think Jan's more likely to get the title shot, just due to the fact that he's been more active lately. Sterling's had a few injuries and whatnot, and the fact that every single one of Jan's fights end in such a violent finish.
That's it. Like, Jan didn't take hardly any damage in his last fight against Faber, and he looked great, impressive finish. Aljamain Sterling's on a roll. Plus, his injury timeline seems to kind of line up with Cejudo's return, so that's kind of how I see it. Like to get thoughts on that.
And it would be fun too, because the guys we've seen Cejudo fight as of late, like TJ Dillashaw and Marlon Moraes, they're very heavy power and not really volume guys. But when you look at both Piotr Jan and Aljamain Sterling more so than Jan, he never stops throwing punches. In his last fight against Pedro Munoz, they basically just threw punches. There wasn't a 5-second period in that whole fight where a strike wasn't thrown. And it was one of the better fights of last year that kind of doesn't get a lot of credit.
So if we continue on with PFL, one of the fights, my fight of the night, was Natan Schulte taking on Loik Radzhabov. And it was interesting because Radzhabov is Tajik, so he's from Tajikistan, and they had the UN ambassador from Tajikistan behind the scenes, like taking pictures with him. A lot of pressure there, and it's not like Tajikistan gets a lot of shine for MMA. So
find it on that.
For a guy fighting for championship from the country, they talked about it in the broadcast. Maybe it can get legalized in the country, but it's definitely a good sign. I mean, you see this from France, people calling out other countries.
Oh, yeah.
It's good to see Radzhabov having success, especially in an organization like this, on New Year's Eve, on a major network. He takes on Schulte. It was a close fight at points. I mean, Radzhabov threw a lot of power. They both got tired. Rounds 4 and 5 and even most of 3 were kind of slow, but Schulte able to pull out the win. Again, in 2 fights in a row, Palmer was a 2018-2019 champ, Schulte 2018-2019 at lightweight. And those are World Series of Fighting hangover type of guys that carried over. So you have to kind of wonder, especially with those two, with Palmer and Schulte, what could be or what could have been if they competed in the UFC. You never know.
If I'm both of them, I don't change a thing. I'm going to collect $1 million every single year until the PFL tells me to stop.
Exactly. I mean, do you take the Justin Gaethje approach and go over to the UFC, or do you stick around?
Because they don't have the style to appeal to the mainstream. Like if Justin Gaethje stayed in the PFL and fought last season or this season, he runs through all those guys and he knocks them all out viciously. They don't have that, and their first fight in the UFC, we can put them in a main event, because that's what they were able to do with Justin Gaethje. And he's kind of like what the Korean Zombie used to be and kind of became again. Justin Gaethje, he could lose 9 fights in a row. You're still going to watch him fight. Lance Palmer, if he loses 2 in a row, everyone forgets kind of who he is in the UFC.
Well, that's Matt's take on it. Like to hear what
it's
everybody
a harsh
thinks.
one, but it is the truth. Like, he doesn't have a style that's so, oh my goodness, I need to stop what I'm doing to watch Lance Palmer fight.
All right, and we continue along at heavyweight. You had Jared Rosholt. He went 6-2 in the UFC. He's 20-7 going into this fight, taking on the unbeaten 8-0 Ali Isaev from Dagestan. He got the win. I mean, he chain wrestled. He was an Olympic wrestler, Rosholt, an All-American, and it was a fairly lackluster fight until Isaev was able to get Rosholt in a compromised position and just rain down the blows, get the TKO in the 4th round. He's your heavyweight champ and undefeated. In your co-main event, the fight that most people were looking forward to, Matt and myself included, you had Ray Cooper III. His second chance in a finals. I mean, he had a lot of his family in attendance for the first one, and this one had family there, not as much. His dad and his brothers in his corner taking on David Michaud, who we talked about, college wrestler, but very, very well-rounded.
Exactly.
A guy who's competed in the UFC, Bellator, all over the place. And, it went the way of Ray Cooper. He was able to get into a clinch position, hit Michaud with a knee to the liver in the first round, and then he kind of did a similar thing in the second, able to get the TKO there. They say body punch to the ground and ground and pound. But a great win for Ray Cooper III, and that's one of those fighters that you can see translating over to the UFC.
But here's the problem. He's going to be like a Curtis Millender. The problem with Ray Cooper III is he can strike with pretty much anyone, but the second you put him on his back, he doesn't have Curtis Millender just looks lost when he's on the ground. Ray Cooper can get back up to his feet.
Ray Cooper can, and his forward pressure and actually his offensive wrestling is very good.
But the problem is, with the cardio issues and with the takedown defense, that's the only thing that worries me. But he is a guy, like you said, Bellator is probably a perfect fit for him. I could see, especially the fact they go. I just feel like he'd be a lot better in Bellator. They have a better division kind of suited for him, and you can't tell me that Ray Cooper III versus MVP wouldn't be a fight that you wouldn't want to watch over and over again.
And then in your main event, you had Kayla Harrison taking on Larissa Pachecho, and that's a fight where, oh boy, the season was more or less set up where everybody, media, fans included, all thought that it was going to be Kayla Harrison taking on Sarah Kaufman in the finals. So it was going to be Canada versus USA. It ended up Larissa Pacheco was able to eke out the win over Kaufman. This is a rematch. Harrison fought Pacheco earlier on in the season, got the win, and then over and over and over again in the promos, they showed where Pacheco got the back of Harrison. I mean, she's a black belt in BJJ. Harrison, of course, 2-time Olympic gold medalist in judo, the biggest, most celebrated judoka practitioner in history.
Since Ronda Rousey.
So they kept showing that promo over and over again, and I scored this fight 50-42, if I'm not mistaken, for Kayla Harrison. I had, 3 10-8 rounds. It was weird because the judges scored at 50-43, 50-45, 50-45. I think they might have had their eyes closed. I know PFL's big thing is that they're showing stats. Some of their stats don't mean dick all.
No,
like they showed
stats in MMA never really mean that much, for being honest.
We look into them.
I know we look into them, and they can kind of tell you, but you can't look at a fight and look at the stats and be like, that tells the whole story.
One day I will show the important stats that I look at, but I'll give you this: total strikes in a fight don't mean anything. Nope. Don't show them. Arm strikes, leg strikes, they depend round by round, maybe.
And it's different. It depends on the fighter, too.
Yeah, and then the other thing that they kept showing was strike speed. That means absolutely nothing. Exactly. Then they showed distance traveled, like that was a thing.
They've done that in the UFC. When Gustafsson fought Daniel Cormier, I remember they did that because Gustafsson, he moves a lot, DC doesn't. But those stats don't mean anything.
There was another fight where it was the Radzhabov Schulte fight where they showed the cage and, octagon, circle, what have you. And in the center, they showed the amount of time that I believe it was Schulte spent on the inside versus the outside. And Randy Couture said, because he spent about 63% on the outside and 30% on the inside. And they said, that's because Schulte was really pressuring the fight, pushing the pace. No, it was because Radzhabov was pushing the pace and pushing him back up against the cage. But some of these stats that they had didn't really make a whole lot of sense. I'd be interested to see what people thought of it because it's nice to see certain things. Like PFL really accentuates leg reach, which is kind of neat.
It doesn't mean anything, though.
It's kind of neat because normally all they show is just reach, and then they call it that. But leg reach is sometimes important and neat to see. But in this fight, Kayla Harrison, pretty much foregone conclusion, she was going to win. Mike Tyson putting the belt around her, kind of neat to see.
I'm going to sound really harsh on Kayla Harrison. I don't see her being a big star outside of PFL.
I think she is.
I don't think so, because if you watch more than 2 or 3 of her interviews, she's not like that good, and she's very vanilla. No, but she's not the most likable person on camera. She comes off very arrogant, and not in like the Ronda Rousey way, whereas I'm arrogant because I am the best and I've done all these great things. Kayla Harrison comes off as like, oh, I've already done all this great stuff, but in MMA she's still very unproven. She's beaten a bunch of ladies in the PFL who she was winning as she walked into the cage. Like, she beat them before the fight even started.
That's the one thing that I don't like. There's 2 different schools of thought. I know Alexander K. Lee from MMA Fighting threw out a tweet. You can go find it, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said basically they almost set her up to fail because instead of giving her cans like people that were 1 and 3 in the UFC, they actually gave her some decent opponents. Like Larissa Pachecho is 25 years old. She was 13 and 3 going into this fight. When she was 21, she fought in the UFC and lost to Germaine Durandamy and who was it? Jessica Andrade.
But here's my problem. She isn't a 155er. Kayla Harrison's the only woman in her division.
That's it. Larissa Pacheco is a bantamweight. And, you know, Sarah Kaufman's a featherweight. She's a
bantamweight.
They had some bantamweights and featherweights competing. But Kayla Harrison's the only true 155er. She fought Josette Cotton was a lightweight.
But that's like the equivalent of if the UFC had said, okay, Cyborg can't make 135, Ronda, Misha, all you girls move up and fight her at her weight class.
Yeah.
So we're not really getting a very good understanding of how good Kayla Harrison is, due to the fact that everyone she's fighting, she is massive compared to them. And I'm not like trying to discredit her, but it's true. The second they walk into the cage, you can tell Kayla Harrison cuts to 155, and everyone she fights has to gain weight to get to 155. So she's walking in with at least a 15-pound weight advantage over everyone she's fought up to this date. And it's just really hard to tell where her skill level's at due to that.
And they've said that they're going to have 12 fighters in the women's lightweight season next year.
That's great. They're all going to be bantamweights, though.
But yeah, it'll be interesting. It's like when the Ultimate Fighter recently had a season at 145 to try and grow the division, and a lot of the fighters were blown up 135ers.
And they all just moved down.
They were some 145ers from Invicta, but everybody either moved down, went back to Invicta. Nobody really stuck around. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with it. Personally, I think she is a star. You wouldn't have had her main event this. You wouldn't have had her main event other cards in the past.
How well did this card do, though?
It'll be interesting to see the numbers.
I don't mean that to like take a jab. I just mean it. She's getting a very big promotional push, and I just don't know if she's the type of star who can really handle that big promotion. Because once you go beneath the surface and kind of, look up anything about her, her record's kind of padded. She's fighting in a division that was made specifically for herself in an organization that's doing nothing but pushing her. So it'll be interesting to see where she goes moving forward.
It will. It was an enjoyable card, and that pretty much sums up the PFL. We'll head over into the chat right now. The chat over on YouTube. You can see Oliver filling it up. If you want to get your say, have it. We'll also fill in with Periscope as well as we continue on. But talking about the bantamweight division, Oliver says Sterling, Jan, Sandhagen will beat Cejudo. No. I think they're all good matchups. Sandhagen, obviously, you can't forget him. The only reason I didn't include him in my Jan and Sterling, is just the fact that Sandhagen was supposed to face Frankie Edgar. We don't get that fight, of course. And that, again, was supposed to be at 135.
Sterling, I think, has the best chance of beating him just due to the fact that his cardio is so good and his volume is good. Jan could knock him out, but I feel like Jan would eventually have the same problem that Michaud did. And then Sandhagen, I feel like he needs one more.
And your next comment, we're going to get into that in our next segment, my favorite part of the show, the Twitter Purge. So we will get it over to the Twitter Purge right now and talk some more about, like I said, we've got the PFL. Very interesting from what we had. And again, you had those 2 champs. And that's one of those things that I had focused on, was the fact that Schulte and Palmer were able to do it back-to-back, which is something that was surprising. And again, I wonder how Rory McDonald's scheme kind of fits into this. It'll be interesting to see. But we covered that, at quite a bit of length. That was another one of the tweets that I had, was, of course, a Rory McDonald signing with PFL. So if we continue along, another one of those things was Bloody Elbow. And you had Rampage Jackson. I'll make it a little bit smaller so everybody can see it. There we go. Rampage Jackson showed up to Bellator 237 over in Japan. Now I've got us up on the screen so I can see us, and just deleting my tweets. Point being, Rampage did not look good against Fedor Emelianenko. He did not look good whatsoever. So it'll be interesting to see if he comes back. I would think you're going to see him fight at heavyweight next.
He's
but hopefully it's less than 265.
That's what I mean. Like, he's never going to weigh 205 pounds to get in his life. But what I'm expecting that they will do, and what they've done for him in the past, is they'll do like a 225 catchweight fight, even though it's basically a cruiserweight, but they'll call it catchweight just so he does have to weigh in at a certain weight in the heavyweight division. Because, yeah, heavyweight just isn't for Rampage. Even when he fought, like, let's be honest, Rampage should have beat Chael Sonnen. He was about 50 pounds heavier than him, and you would just look at both guys' career and think, oh, Rampage is a pretty good style to beat him. He looks terrible at heavyweight. I just don't know if he thinks I can weigh up to this amount, so, you know, I kind of do whatever I want in training camp. But it just seems to be a lack of discipline, especially in the tweet. Believe it or not, I lost 20 pounds for the Fedor fight. Don't get to 285 pounds in the first place. I don't think it would be that difficult if you're a professional athlete.
Yeah, it was bad.
It was awful. And it was one of those things where he didn't even look competitive. It wasn't like, oh, he showed up out of shape, but he still had good moments like Andrew Ruiz did against Anthony Joshua. Like, there was a few points in that fight. You could tell he was out of shape, but he still had a little bit of success. Rampage just kind of walked around and got hit.
Covered up. I mean, Fedor, pop, yeah. Combos, leg kick. Like, it wasn't a good look from Rampage. So if we see him again, hopefully he is able to, I know, you know, there's going to be some content out of it, but hopefully he's able to put some of the weight off, come back, and like you said, if you can goal set and have him at a cruiser weight, that might not be too bad. And if we continue along, we had RIZIN 20.
He's so good.
We had RIZIN 20. It was on the morning of the 31st. It started at 2 a.m. local here. We're an hour ahead of Eastern Standard Time. Patchy Mix gets another win, and this is a guy that's undefeated, pro and amateur. He's a Jackson Wink type of guy. If you get your back, if you get your neck, he's going to choke you out, which is what he did here. And he said before the fight, and even though it was a RIZIN fight against a RIZIN fighter, he wanted a chance at the bantamweight belt, which is vacant right now because of Horiguchi's knee injury. If you're going to put him into a fight like that, do you think James Gallagher already has a fight booked up for Dublin against Cal Eleanor? Yep. So it depends on that. But James Gallagher is the guy that you're going
That's,
with.
I think, promotionally, that would be a lot of fun going into it, because you could say, well, Patchy Mix, the guy who knocked out Gallagher in his last loss, you could play that over and over again. And I think Patchy Mix probably strangles him, too.
I think Patchy Mix, and I know a lot of people out there, I'm going to throw out some names. Some guys like Nolan King and Michael Fidel were calling on the UFC to sign him before he ended up with Bellator. Yeah. Dana White never makes mistakes, but this is one of those guys that I bet you they wish they had signed, because he looks amazing. He's good on the mic, and his performances speak for themselves, because he's finishing people. Like, the win before this was by Sulev Stretch. So
that's the second the fight hits the floor, he's always a threat no matter what. Again, we were talking about Lance Palmer being a grappler who doesn't go for the finish. That's not a problem that Patchy Mix has. The second the fight gets to the ground, he's looking to choke you.
And on the feet, he can switch stances. He can do things very well. He's one of the better fighters that they have.
He's reminiscent of sort of an Emmanuel Sanchez's style, where, yes, he doesn't have a lot of knockouts or TKOs, but he's still a very good striker. He just uses his striking to set up his submissions on the ground.
So great win for Mix over in Japan, and hopefully we get to see him return to the Bellator cage soon. Our next topic, of course, the champions of the night, Kaya Sakura. Oh boy. Manel Cap getting the belt from him. It was an insane TKO performance by him. Sihu Ham gets the win over there, or Hyoham. Tofik Musayev gets the win over Patricky Pitbull, who was victorious earlier in the night by, you can call it TKO due to soccer kicks. That was an insane win.
He hurt every bone in his body in that fight.
He did, and Yuri Prohaska gets the win over CB Dalloway.
Can we please get a Ryan Bader, Yuri Prohaska crossover fight?
Ryan Bader's calling for it.
That's what I mean. Ryan Bader wants it. I want it. Let's do one in a ring, one in a cage. Sign the contract. Make sure you have to do it in both right away. Do like your Darian Caldwell, Kyoji Horiguchi. And that would be so much fun, because right now Ryan Bader has zero competition in Bellator. All of their big men, if you will, like light heavyweight, are 40 or above. There's not many young guys who can actually challenge him. So I think doing that fight would be amazing. Do one in Japan, do one in America. You're going to make all the money.
I think it'd be great. And if we continue along...
And it would be competitive, too.
It would be. It really would be. That's the fight to make, really. I mean, Prohaska is one of those guys you wonder what he could do in the UFC. Well, here's your chance against one of the best of the best.
Like, he has nuclear bombs in his hands.
Your next topic with this segment being the Twitter purge. Shinya Aoki did an interview with Abema TV, rather, which was translated into English over on Twitter. So we'll give credit where credit's due with Karaya Fan. The interesting thing was that Shinya Aoki has fought for one championship recently. He's a one championship fighter. And he said that, if you're paraphrasing, but if you're a one championship fighter, you got to look out for yourself because you never know. There's some red flags that are up in the air. It continues on to say, they haven't really developed a whole lot of homegrown talent. And in the last couple of years, they've supplemented that with, just signing new talent, bringing in big names. They made a big splash in the esports world after they got Demetrius Johnson. They were going to put $50 million into esports.
They were.
In 2017, they lost quite a bit of money, and all of this happened after 2017. I was just surprised that Shinya Aoki's a very recognizable name. He's a JMMA star. I was just surprised that when you're still with the company or just recently competed with the company that you come out and say some things like this.
I mean, at least Shinya Aoki's in that position where what are you going to do, cut him? I mean, it's not like he's going to be a free agent for very long. Even though he is past his prime, he's one of those very recognizable names. And he's going to have a job no matter where he goes. But it is really interesting, too. Like, one of the bigger stars of that organization coming out and being like, listen, guys, it might not be the best idea to sign here and fight here because the company's not going too well. And it just shows that there is zero transparency with one championship and everybody. Media can't cover their weigh-ins. They make up their numbers for viewership because billions of people watch it. They're the number one watched show in all of Asia. And it's very sketchy once you read into it. And it's unfortunate, too, because the more competition for MMA and the more opportunity for fighters, it's better for everybody. And the fact that one of the large organizations of 2019 and 18 is starting to kind of go downhill is very unfortunate.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if there's any blowback from it. Of course, they canceled the Japanese card before, which it says right there. And you never know, maybe they start cutting people. So it'll be interesting to see how it moves forward. I like the fact that, It's similar in a lot of different industries. You'll see all your major players, and then every couple of years, somebody will make a splash, and they'll go out there. And sometimes in the business world, it's usually somebody cuts their rates, and they're cheaper than everybody else. So a lot of people go with them. But in sports, you'll see somebody like in football. You had, the AAF, and now you get the XFL with Vince McMahon. In MMA, you've got your UFC, your Bellator, your Cage Warriors, your LFAs, and then one championship goes boom. Now we're making a major splash. It'll be interesting because normally then it's a sink or swim type of opportunity. So it'll be interesting to see in 2020 what happens with the organization. Their events are fun. I enjoy watching.
But here's the good news, though. One championship might be sort of going downhill, if you will. Do you know what's picking up steam and doing very well? RIZIN, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you get Saki Kibara that ran Pride. So it's a lot of fun there. And again, it'll be interesting to see what happens. If we continue on with the segment, and of course, this is a question that we were asked. Edson Barboza is going to drop to featherweight. Manager endorses fresh start via MMA Junkie and Mike Bond. I guess.
This is a way bigger story than I thought it would be. Before UFC 219, when he fought Khabib, he was going to go down to featherweight to fight Jose Aldo. Like, that was a real conversation that he had. He said he could make the weight easily, and that there was a much easier path to title at 145, not due to the fact that the level of competition isn't as high as it is at 155, because I think we both agree those are by far, well, them and welterweight would be the deepest divisions, just full of killers, top, 1 to 15. But there wasn't that logjam in the top, 3, 4, 5 of the division, where it's one of those cases where we have about 4 number 1 contenders, but one guy's a big star who's going to get the title shot. And then he had the Khabib fight, and no one ever really talked about it again. But if he can make the weight and do it comfortably, let's say he has like a Jose Aldo scenario where, okay, he looks bad, but he makes the weight and he fights very competitively. There's a lot of fun matchups down at 145 for Edson Barboza.
Let's do it, because when fighters move divisions, we like to do this. We've talked about it with Bellator fighters going to the UFC.
I'm just going to say it. Give me Jeremy Stevens versus Edson Barboza right now.
Hold on. All right, so we'll go 15-1 talking Edson Barboza in 2020. First fighter, Arnold Allen. He's got a fight coming up against Josh Emmett.
I'm just going to get to it. He wheel kicks his head off.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult fight.
It's a very hard fight for Arnold Allen.
It kind of reminds me of Dan Hooker.
No, because Dan Hooker has finishing power, and Dan Hooker's nothing but a finisher. Arnold Allen only wins by decision, so that means that you basically have 50 minutes that you have to survive. Not just win, you just have to make it to the end of the bell against Edson Barboza, and that's so hard to do.
Ryan Hall at 14.
Edson Barboza is too good at takedown defense, and on the feet, like Ryan Hall, I'm a really big fan, but that's the worst stylistic matchup.
So I think Barboza beats Allen. I think he can beat Ryan Hall, former tough winner.
He beats him, though.
Beat Artem Lobov. Mirsad Bektic at 13. I think he beats him.
Bektic's chin's questionable and against a guy who hits as hard as Edson.
Shane Burgos is at 12. He's on a big run right now.
It's a fun fight, and I feel like Burgos could win, But Burgos doesn't kick, and he eats leg kicks. That's the problem. Shane Burgos eats a lot of leg kicks. He has a very boxing-heavy style, and what does Edson Barboza do really well? He kicks. So I feel like that's the first one where it's okay, Burgos has a chance, but I would still go with Edson Barboza.
At 11, you got a fighter who he's coming off a main event where he didn't look bad.
He didn't.
He lost the fight. Some people said that he won, Matt included, in Calvin Kattar.
I said he would have won if he went 2 more rounds.
Exactly. In Calvin Kattar, Edson Barboza, in a 3-round fight, how do you see
He
it?
would have the same problem as he did against Zabit. He's another guy. If you're boxing heavy, you have to be able to check leg kicks. Dustin Poirier used to not check leg kicks, and then the Justin Gaethje fight came. He checked a leg kick, hit him with left straight, knocked him out. Now he checks leg kicks. Calvin Kattar and Shane Burgos both haven't reached that level yet of, okay, we can consistently check them, and Edson Barboza would just chop his leg down.
I think Kattar might have learned his lesson there, and he's been in a lot of big spots. I think Kattar would be able to get the win.
Here's my problem. He didn't learn that because Renato Moicano beat him just with leg kicks pretty much, and then Zabit did the same thing. So if you got beat by it once and then beat by it twice, and then you fight the best leg kicker you've ever fought, it wouldn't even be close.
Third time's a charm. Josh Emmett at 10, like I said, he's got a fight coming up against Arnold Allen. Tons of power, but the problem that Josh Emmett has, and you saw it in the Michael Johnson fight,
small.
if you're volume heavy and you can just push the pace against Emmett, you can do well. Now, of course, Michael Johnson got caught, knocked out.
Edson's a lot faster on the feet, though. And the problem is, too, when Emmett gets hit, he kind of like turtles up, sort of like Justin Gaethje style. Like, he'll turtle up, wait. Okay, now it's my turn to throw. And if you turtle up and wait against Edson Barboza, I know Justin Gaethje was able to beat him, but Edson's going to go to the body, go to the head, go to the legs. That's another hard fight for him.
Number 9, Jose.
Division.
Yeah, we'll see, I guess. Jeremy Stevens, who you're calling
I think
for.
it's a really fun fight because both guys are so good at leg kicks. Both guys have crazy power. That fight's probably not going to go to the distance. And it's 2 guys who have lost to, like, they're kind of on sort of bad stretches in their career, but both still very competitive with the elite.
Who would you pick?
I think Edson would win just due to his speed advantage and the fact that Jeremy Stevens gets hurt to the body, Aldo hurt him to the body, Max Holloway hurt him to the body.
And you know what Barboza can do.
Yair hurt him to the body, and that's kind of Edson's bread and butter.
Number 7, a Moicano that's coming off a loss to the Korean Zombie
he's
quite a
moving
while
up
ago.
in weight, so that fight wouldn't happen.
Frankie Edgar, who probably moving down to 135.
You know as well as I do, Edson Barboza flying knees him.
And then if we go 5,
This is when it gets really interesting.
Korean Zombie, Zabit Magomed Shripov, Brian Ortega, Max Holloway, and your champ Volkanovski. I think all of them beat Barboza.
I do, but I think him and Yair's a crazy fun fight. Zombie, he probably gets knocked out, but it's still a really fun fight. Like, those are main event caliber fight right away. And I think it's a good. Anytime you go down in a division, and Edson's been at 155 for a long time. He's fought pretty much everyone in the top 15, so a lot more fresh matchups. Even if he doesn't win them all, it's going to be a lot of fun him down a weight class. And just to see kind of how his speed and his power translate down a weight class, because let's say he keeps his power and his speed moving down to 145, he's going to just start destroying everybody. Because he hits so hard for 155, or as it is. If he can move down and be healthy, I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it should be, and it's very interesting to see, and a good talking point as well. And if we continue on, the last topic of conversation that I have here, you've got Mark Jacasey taking on Stevie Ray coming up for UFC London, which is a card that's really, really coming together. It seems quite good. This is a matchup that actually really surprised me, because Stevie Ray beat Michael Johnson in his last fight, which I was surprised. It was a really close fight. I thought Johnson won. Credit where credit's due. Ray gets the win, but Mark Jacasey's looked great in his last 2 wins over Joe Duffy and Lando Venata.
So Jacasey went on that 3-fight losing streak, and everyone wrote him off, and even I did too. And then he fought Joe Duffy, who I was like, well, Joe Duffy, I know he had taken a long time off, and he lost
beat Conor McGregor at one point.
But still, he's a very skilled fighter. He's got good boxing, great jiu-jitsu, and if you can beat him, it shows that you definitely do belong in the UFC. And Mark Jacasey beat the brakes off him. He dropped him 2 or 3 times, I can't remember. Anyway, he hurt him nonstop throughout the fight. His kicks were amazing. The problem with Jacasey is, can his cardio hold up throwing all those crazy things? And he has gotten better at it. I feel like the Nasrat hack press fight was a big eye-opening experience for him, because he had success early, kind of get tired, and then hack press, who just kind of keeps on going for it. He's that tiny Kelvin Gastelum for a reason. But in this fight, I don't know how Stevie Ray wins this. Jacasey, just the way he's looked as of late, as long as he doesn't tire before the second round, I feel like he'll be able to just inflict enough damage to make it so that, yes, I might be tired, but you're going to be in agony by the third round. So we'll hopefully, it should be a good fight, though. I feel like Jacasey should win, though.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. You look at Stevie Ray, I mean, it's good to see a fighter from Scotland, on a card like this against an English fighter in Mark Jacasey. Also weird that the UFC hasn't really made a push to go to Scotland because you have a fair amount of fighters from there right now on your roster. But still, Ray's coming off a fight where he lost to Santos and got finished. And then he fought Michael Johnson in a really close one. It just seems like odd matchmaking to me, but it should be a fun fight. Like,
if Chikasi wins this, then I would like to see him kind of get back on the track that he was before of, okay, this is a real prospect. We kind of take him seriously. And here's a fight that could be a lot of fun if the guy decides to move back down and weight. I would like to see James Vick fight Mark Chikasi if Mark Chikasi can Steve Ray, for this reason only. James Vick, I know, has lost a lot lately, but he only loses to really good fighters and guys who have vicious punching power. Mark Chikasi doesn't really have that. He can hit hard, but he's much more of a kicker, and I feel like he's speed over power. So if you want Mark Chikasi to get that big name win, because people still know who James Vick is, feed James Vick.
I think losing to Nico Price kind of takes a little bit of water out of that.
Oh, it does for sure, but he's still
argument.
A big enough name because he's been in the top 15 before.
So at friend 4_ says Tyson, and at 604 MMA says, "Hey boys, how are you making out?" I know it was 4 minutes ago, but yeah, when we head into the Twitter purge, we get deep and dirty with the Twitter purge. So yeah, I mean, we had PFL Championships. We talked about a little bit about RIZIN. If we just go through it quickly, because it was one of the things that we kind of missed when we started, but it started off with Tofik Musayev. Like I said, he was taking on Johnny Case, who just announced that he had his last fight with RIZIN, and he's going to join PFL for the next season.
Exciting.
So it's interesting to see him slot in at 155. He had success in the UFC. That's interesting. He had Tricky Pitbull beating Luis Gustavo.
That was so violent.
Knocked him to the ground in the turnbuckle because it's
just
ring. And then Soccer kicked him. If we continue up through the card, Jake Hume gets another win, finishes Satoshi Ishii. Patchy Mix, of course, the win over Matoya. If we continue up through again, Simon Bayong gets the win over Vitaly Shmetov at heavyweight, or light heavyweight rather. A good win and a good prospect in Bayong. I can't wait to see him fight again.
Got to hang out the gloves.
Prahakshik gets the win over CB Dalloway, a first round knockout. Messiah beats Patricky to win the belt. That was the finals.
He had torn everything in that fight.
Reina Kubota avenges her loss to Lindsay Van Zant over In Pride. Of course, they fought in Bellator. Mikuru Asakura gets a win over John Makapa. Again, John Makapa has a decent record, but he is on a rough run right now.
It's been tough.
Seohee Ham wins the belt. It was considered the super atomweight belt against Ayaka Hamasaki. And then you had Tenshin Asakawa
absolutely dismantle some poor man.
Yeah, Rui Ibata, he looked awesome again. Super prospect. That fight against Mayweather makes me question everything. And then